The word please appeared 11 times on the final, decrypted layer of the human archive. Written in a shaking script, it replaced the expected strategic yield or surrender conditions. I watched my nictitating membranes shudder rapidly against the terminal glare as the 19-layer cipher finally gave up its ghost. What happened next? I wish I could say it ended there. Stay close. Warm then. The ceramic of the coffee cup had still been. 3 weeks before the archive's final layer hissed open. In the quiet of the morning kitchen on Meridian Hub, the smell of roasted beans clung to the sterile air like a defiant ghost. Elias Thorne sat across from me, his knuckles white against the dark tabletop. Fresh from the Silex hegemony, my training had prepared me for the cold mathematics of planetary subjection. Caliph, they called me, seventh scion of the Great Deciphering. My task was clinical. Document the human diplomat's daily movements and locate the specific psychological boundary condition that would trigger a surrender. Across the kitchen counter, the human placed a second cup of coffee. He did not ask if I wanted it. He simply set it down and returned to his tablet, his spine straight as a load-bearing pillar in a collapsing mine. A scent-based lure, I initially cataloged the motion in my digital logs. Humans were notoriously inefficient with resources, yet the diplomat repeated this gesture every morning at exactly 06:15. Beneath the soft hum of the environmental recyclers, I could hear the rhythmic tap of his fingers against the glass. He was reviewing the 19-layer cipher, the document my people had spent 20 years trying to crack, yet his face remained as unreadable as a dead star. A single tear tracked down his jaw. I noted the biological discharge in my digital logs as a hardware glitch in the human's ocular cooling system. It seemed a logical conclusion. No professional diplomat would suffer a fluid leak during a treaty review unless the internal hardware was failing. Following the ritual, Elias stood and adjusted his lapels, his movements carrying a weight that my tactical invisibility sensors struggled to quantify. He walked with a deliberate preference for peace that felt, to my trained eyes, like a carefully masked form of structural failure. Outside the Meridian Hub, the Solis Reach shimmered with the drive signatures of the Silex Vanguard, a fleet that outnumbered the local human defense by 10 to 1. I spent hours in the unrestricted diplomatic archive, scanning the 847-page record of the Juro Republic's failed invasion. The Silex High Command had dismissed the Juro as primitive, yet here were images of their dreadnoughts reduced to slag. His daily routine never deviated, a framework of habit that I initially found comforting in its predictability. The human would drink his coffee, water the struggling green plant on the windowsill, and then spend hours on level-tone calls with neighboring star systems. "We are holding the line," he would say, his voice lacking the vibrato of fear. To me, it sounded like the delusion of a species that had forgotten how to calculate a surrender point. One evening, a notification flashed on my wrist. The mandatory review of the boundary condition had been escalated. 3 Draxer warships had entered the Reach, their heavy, static presence rattling the station's outer hull. I watched Thorne through the kitchen's transparency, noticing how he didn't reach for a weapon or a communication relay. Instead, he simply reached for the ceramic cup, his thumb tracing the rim of the vessel with a focus that made my shuddering membranes ache. Came the order I had expected. Silence. He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the red emergency lighting of the corridor. "Caliph," he said, using my name for the first time since the binding ritual began. "Do you know why we don't use digital locks on our deepest history?" Like a breach in my tactical framework, the question felt. I didn't answer, watching as he slid the war archive toward me, the 19th layer beginning to hum with an unnatural, low-frequency vibration. Within the glowing depths of the unrestricted archive lay a history of iterative failure so profound it defied Silex tactical logic. 41 times, the humans had been burned to the soil, their cities reduced to ash and their drive signatures extinguished. Yet, following each collapse, the data showed a 40-second restructuring, a rebuilding effort that ignored the mathematical probability of extinction. To my junior analytical mind, this was a hardware glitch on a planetary scale, and refusal to accept the reality of the void. I tapped the 19-layer cipher icon on my wrist, my membranes shuddering against the sheer volume of grief encoded into the 847 pages. This was the knowledge I had sought, but it felt less like a weapon and more like a load-bearing wall. Beneath the clinical reports of the Juro Republic's defeat, I found a scanned artifact, a blue ribbon once worn by a child named Sarah, age 6. It was a memory of a person who had died 3 centuries ago, preserved not for its strategic value, but because the humans refused to let her sit in the dark alone. A hardware leak occurred again, the salt water discharge stinging my own ocular sensors as I realized that Elias Thorne wasn't just a diplomat. He was a caretaker of a cemetery that spanned the stars. Every coffee cup he placed, every level-toned call he made, was an act of radical empathy. He wasn't luring me. He was inviting a trainee to witness the weight of his species. Before the terminal, Elias stood and quietly watered the struggling green plant on the windowsill. He checked the soil moisture with a blunt thumb, his movements routine and mundane. The 19-layer cipher hissed, the final barrier dissolving under my 7th Scion clearance. Came the final realization. Calith stares at the final page of the War Archive where a superior alien fleet's final transmission is reduced to the word, please, repeated 11 times. The Juro hadn't been defeated by a secret weapon. They had been broken by the sight of a species that would rather fail 41 times than surrender its humanity. They are testing the boundary, Elias said, his voice a low vibration against the hull of Meridian Hub. He sent a single, unencrypted message to the Draxer warships, containing nothing but the access codes to the Juro files. Within 6 hours, the drive signatures of the Draxer fleet vanished from the Solis Reach, retreating into the black. I watched the Draxer flee, my tactical framework lying in ruins at my feet. The hegemony had sent me to find a weakness, but I had found a deterrent that no empire could name without fear. My hand hovered over the terminal, the official dissolution papers from the Silix High Command waiting for my digital signature to confirm my departure. Calith drops the blue-sparking dissolution papers into the recycling unit. A final transmission I wrote to my superiors, my recursive logic replaced by a simple, human-like certainty. I stated that the 19-layer cipher was not a code to be broken, but a boundary condition to be respected. The humans do not fight for territory. They fight for the blue ribbons and the ceramic cups. Reclassification report. Subject 847 Solis. Threat level. Indeterminate. Status. Binding ritual persists. The ceramic cup sat on the gray counter. Steam rose in a thin, white curl. Beyond the window, the Solis Reach turned away from the sun. The recycling unit hissed once. A second cup waited,